Hey folks, my name is Jerry Hughes. I'm the director of the Neuro-Linguistic Learning Center in California, and I'd like to take a couple of pages out of our parent workshops and take a look at stress and learning. And as we like to say at the Neuro-Linguistic Learning Center, stress is the enemy of learning. Learning is complex enough as it is for anybody at any time. What happens when you're trying to learn while you're stressed? And when I say stress, this can be very subtle. It may not be apparent. It may be just a natural state. And we're going to talk about that so that we can have a better understanding. But before we look at stress and the autonomic nervous system, let's just take a quick look at learning. And without going into too much detail, there are certain skills that are required for effective learning. Reading, obviously, handwriting, essay and composition, memorizing your spelling words, recognizing vocabulary words, putting the word with the meaning, memorization of all kinds of facts, concrete and abstract, math facts, history facts, grammar, the concepts of mathematics, critical thinking, test-taking skills, which is recalling information and knowing which answer is correct. And lastly, project management, being able to take a goal and break it down into small tasks that can be achieved one at a time, coming together to achieve that final assignment or project. Those are some of the things that are happening in a classroom, and we actually point to about 24 important skills to succeed in the classroom, but this is just a kind of a little summary here. And then the processes, the sensory perception and processes required to complete these skills, because there is no brain function for writing essays. There's no brain function for spelling or taking a test. Those skills are all the result of very specific functions, brain functions, for perceiving and processing sensory information. And at the top of the list is focus and attention. If you can't focus on the information, if you can't pay attention, you're almost dead in the water before you get going. You need visual perception, letters, numbers, maps, graphs, charts. All that information needs to be perceived and digested visually. Some of it needs to be perceived in a very specific way. For example, in reading, the letters are two-dimensional symbols. They're very specific. They have very specific characteristics and features. And if you try to generalize those features and characteristics, you're going to be at a serious disadvantage when it comes to processing written information. Auditory perception. Again, if you naturally perceive auditory information in terms of patterns rather than discrete sounds or phonemes, you're going to have a much harder time processing verbal and written information. It's a very specific brain function that allows us to decode discrete sounds. Working memory. I like to call this auditory memory, because it largely is related to auditory memory. It's processing auditory information in a linear fashion, as opposed to our eidetic memory, which is more visual. And as a human being, you may be more dominant, if you will, with auditory memory and auditory processing, and your access to the world around you is a little more auditory based. Whereas some folks, particularly those with some learning challenges like dyslexia, ADD, autism, may be more visually dominant, and they tend to relate to their world visually rather than auditorily. Inductive and deductive reasoning, we're going to talk about that a little bit because they're critical to the learning process, and they're not the same. Synesthesia. Synesthesia, if you're not familiar with that word, is the union of senses. It's two senses coming together to create something else. And as human beings, we tend to be dominant in either our auditory kinesthetic synesthesia, feeling what we hear, or visual kinesthetic synesthesia, feeling what we see. And again, these are very different, and they're very critical to the test-taking process. And finally, empathy and rapport. You might not see these normally in a learning environment, but the ability to empathize with your teacher or be in rapport with your teacher, to give her teaching validation, It's an important part of the learning process. So again, we're going to look at that later. All right, so now that we looked at the classroom, some learning skills, we're going to jump into, take a quick look at the autonomic nervous system. A lot going on here. Our autonomic nervous system is kind of like what controls all our unconscious functions, the things we don't think about, breathing, heart rate, digesting our food. And as you can see, there are actually 3 parts to the autonomic nervous system. We're only going to talk about 2. These are the main 2 parts that are of interest to us. And it's the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. And why is that? Why are these so important? Well, the parasympathetic nervous system is really our relaxed and restful state. When we're feeling any happiness, joy, when we're feeling safe and secure, we are typically in the parasympathetic state. The parasympathetic nervous system is what's active and controlling, allowing us to digest our food, healing, growth. All these things occur in the parasympathetic state. We are more thoughtful and responsive in the parasympathetic state. We're not on alert. We're just relaxed, chilling, just chilling and able to just be where we are. We can be open and sensitive to others. We're not on guard. We generally have improved cognition, good working memory, good thought process, good judgment is all part of that parasympathetic state. Again, focus and attention, reasoning and good judgment, all things that are available to us when we're in that relaxed, restful state when the parasympathetic nervous system is activated. Conversely, when our sympathetic nervous system is activated, whenever we're afraid or angry or stressed and even sad or feeling guilty, all these emotions, and I hate to say negative emotions because they all have a purpose, but these other emotions, they put us in a very specific neurological state, and it's an important state. It's not something we want to discard, but it's not always useful. A side effect of too much of this negative emotion can be anxiety and depression. Chronic negative emotions can often lead to this state of generalized anxiety or depression. I just put that in there as something to come back to later. So this is our freeze, fight, or flight state. We're reactive. We're aware of our surrounding. We're highly alert, maybe hyper alert, or we can be hyper focused on one thing. It's interesting how those two go together. We're not interested in acquiring information for theoretical or hypothetical situations. We're looking at the current moment and how to survive the current moment. Now, this is a state of mind. It's not something that somebody is doing per se. It's not something they think about or something they're aware of. If you were to ask a child, are you nervous or stressed? Are you in the sympathetic state? They can't answer that. Most adults can't answer that. But it can be there. It can be internalized, and it can be very subtle. But you will see certain signs. You'll see the kids in the class that they kind of look like bobbleheads. They're looking around. They're always on the alert. And maybe they're struggling with judgment or maybe even a lack of empathy and rapport. They feel like outsiders right now. And those can all be related to that sympathetic state. So you can see we have two very contrasting states for the human condition, if you will. Both important, but they're very different. So let's take a look at that again. Let's take a look at that sympathetic state in a little bit more detail. And again, we call it the freeze, fight, or flight state. And something very, very important, and we'll get to this in our larger discussions, is binocular vision. So we have two eyes, and with two eyes in the front of our head, we're not like parrots. We don't have our eyes on the side of our head. We have binocular vision. And with that vision, we can do two things that most other animals can't. We can judge speed and distance. That's the critical thing. So whenever there is a potential threat, say a bear, and we need to know, do I run? Do I freeze? Do I fight? Do I climb a tree? We need to know how far away the threat is and how fast it's moving. When we're in that sympathetic state, when we're threatened, conversely, maybe we're hunting for food, but we're still going to be in that state, that fight or flight state, so that we can judge speed and distance. And again, as we talked about, hyper alert or hyper focused, two sides of the same coin. We're going to be distractible. We're going to be looking around us. We're looking for anything that might be a potential threat or anything related to our current survival situation. And we're trying to solve that puzzle. We're trying to chop through as much information as we can in the present moment that's going to allow us to survive this situation. So as we see, this is not a great state for being in the classroom, right? If you are nervous about taking a test, if you're nervous about speaking in front of the classroom, you might have a hard time if you're in the sympathetic state. You might have a hard time remembering what you studied last week. You might have a hard time knowing which answer. You're looking at 4 answers on the test, A, B, C, and D. It's like, which one? They all look the same. They all sound the same. This can be a real problem when you're expected to memorize and recall large amounts of information that you really don't need at the moment. It's not relevant to your survival. So let's take a look at this parasympathetic nervous system and this relaxed and focused state, what we call the learning state. So as you see, we have 2 eyes, but instead of binocular vision, we're now using our peripheral vision. We're not trying to track a potential threat or food. We're just chilling. In this state, in this relaxed and focused state, our focus and attention is available for whatever is in front of us. It's not being directed by that instinct to look at anything we might hear or see, anything out of the corner of our eye that could be a potential threat. Instead, we're just relaxed. We're just kind of taking it all in. This is really important because we've got techniques and strategies using this tendency, this difference in using our peripheral vision and this hyper alert, hyper focused state to help shift us into a state that is more conducive to being in the classroom, this parasympathetic state. We want to be able to utilize this difference between binocular and vision and peripheral vision to help us shift into this parasympathetic state. And as we've discussed, this state allows us to access our cognitive abilities, our organizational abilities, that working memory, and just as important or more important to our dyslexic, ADHD, and autistic folks is accessing that eidetic memory and using it in a way that's going to allow us to memorize visual information or access visual memories, and then integrate those memories, those visual and auditory memories together. So that's the goal, is to help our students attain that parasympathetic state while they're in the classroom to make learning easier, faster, and even more fun. At the Learning Center and the programs that we try to make available online, this is the focus of almost every program. How does that child perceive and process sensory information, and how can we make that process and perception available? So here we are. You've got our website, swishforfish.com. My name is Ish. I have a dish. With my dish, I swish for fish. Feel free to check us out. Check out our programs on the web. Feel free to email us, text us. We're here to help.